Check.
We're here with some of the younger first fans for The Last Airbender, and we'll start with the youngest. What do you think?
It sucks.
The Last Airbender really blew my mind. Which one, you ask? Both.
Both.
I'm serious, both the Avatar show and movie blew my ever-loving mind. For different reasons, of course. Avatar The Last Airbender was amazing. It's one of those things that gets tossed around as being one of the greatest shows of all time, so naturally it's something I have to experience for myself. Yet, despite all the praise it gets, I was still shocked with how good everything was. The animation is stellar, the characters are all interesting and likable, and just the whole mythos and story is endlessly fascinating. Honestly, I could keep going over every little detail I like about it, but then I'd just be reciting the whole series, more or less. With that in mind, you'd think I would want to stay as far away as possible from the live-action Shyamalan movie, seeing as how I love the original show and all. Well, thanks to years of Star Wars saturation, I've gotten kinda used to stories and characters I love getting shafted and spat upon for the sake of a couple $1,000,000. Watching beloved IPs get worse over time or get awful sequels and reboots is honestly kind of fascinating. Even beloved stories and characters I'm not familiar with getting ruined is pretty interesting to me. I just love seeing how something could be despised so much and whether the hate is truly justified.
Bumblebee, stop lubricating the man.
Get that thing to stop, huh?
Even though I don't entirely subscribe to the mindset of this thing ruined my childhood, I'd be lying if I said I didn't understand where these people were coming from. So after being told for years that the live-action adaptation for The Last Airbender is one of the worst things ever made, I needed to see how and why. I was probably almost as excited to watch the movie than I was the actual TV show. I mean, how could The Last Airbender fuck up so badly?
Let's find out.
Well, I watched through the whole thing, and as I stated earlier, I was blown away. The fact that something this bad can exist when it's based off of something so good just absolutely boggles my mind. But why is it so bad? What does this movie get so wrong? Well, it's quite simple. And by simple, I mean complex. So enough of the intro, let's begin. Spoilers ahead for both the show and movie.
Yeah, that's one fine-looking barbecue pit.
Why doesn't mine look like that? Why must life be so?
Here's a weird question I found myself asking. Is The Last Airbender disappointingly bland?
Perhaps.
I mean, it has the makings for a disappointingly bland movie. It wasn't as good as people were probably expecting, and it's without a doubt a boring void of nothingness that is nowhere near the genius of its original source material. However, I wouldn't personally label it as such. This may seem a bit confusing, so let me try to explain my reasoning. The reason I labeled BVS and Monsters University as disappointingly bland is because they disappointed me in some way, and left nothing to think about in terms of lasting impact or memorability. In my opinion, of course. And that's why I've coined the term for my channel. Disappointingly bland is to describe movies that I felt have disappointed me and left me with nothing to appreciate. Or at least, very little to appreciate. Even though at the time of making this script I've only made a total of 2 videos with that description, I have other movies I would label as such. Dr. Sleep, District 9, Glass, the first Bad Boys movie, even The Last Jedi. All of these movies disappointed me because I had some form of hype or expectations surrounding them, whether through hearing how good they were or from them sounding like things I'd like, but also lacking some sort of actual substance for me to truly care, hence why they're also bland. Disappointingly bland is a subjective term, meaning I label these movies due to my expectations and overall feelings towards them. Some people may not see some of these as disappointing or even bland, but that's for them to decide. Hell, maybe my opinions will change on them eventually. But as for now, that's how I feel. Last Airbender is kinda interesting though, because I would make the argument that it's by nature disappointingly bland. It disappointed a lot of people and has absolutely no substance. While I wasn't personally disappointed by the movie, it seems a lot of people were. That's a whole lot of half-star ratings on Letterboxd, and as garbage as the other movie rating websites are, they're not far from accurate either. People were expecting a masterpiece, but got this instead. So kind of a weird technicality, but I would consider Last Airbender to be disappointingly bland. But I would also understand if you wouldn't think so. Because maybe you just think it's shit. So to get back on track, why is The Last Airbender disappointing? Well, it's a live-action adaptation of one of the most beloved television shows of all time. If it were to screw up even the smallest of details, people wouldn't be happy in the slightest. So imagine how people felt when this movie got exactly 0 things right. I rarely ever call a movie incorrect, seeing as how it's almost impossible to label an entire movie wrong. A movie can get things wrong for sure, and even be insufferably bad, but I would rarely ever call a movie incorrect. Well, this movie is one of the exceptions so far because I can't think of a single thing it does right. It fails at being two things, an adaptation and as a movie. I'll go into a little more detail as to how it fails as a movie later on, but for now, I want to talk about how it's disappointing through analyzing it as an adaptation. The Last Airbender is a live-action adaptation of the Nickelodeon show. Adaptation is defined as being the action or process of adapting or being adapted, meaning it's being made suitable for a new use or purpose. In this case, the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender is being molded to be shown in a different medium. Rather than being a 20-episode long season, it's being condensed into a 2-hour-long film. Okay, now with definitions out of the way, here's my big question. Why? As in, why make a live-action adaptation of The Last Airbender in the first place? Was there really a need for a live-action Last Airbender movie? I've been thinking about adaptations in general recently because I realize just how hit or miss they are. I don't want to entirely devalue the idea of adaptations though. Some of my favorite movies are adaptations. Movies that are essentially introducing other works into the realm of film. And sometimes they're freaking awesome. I probably wouldn't know about the absolutely beautiful world of The Lord of the Rings had it not been for the Peter Jackson films. I certainly wouldn't have experienced the maddening downward spiral of Jack Torrance, or the breathtaking Tears in the Rain monologue, or even Michael Corleone's rise to power had it not been for these movies. All adaptations of already established works. So why do I bring up my gripes with adaptations? Well, here's the big difference between Last Airbender and Lord of the Rings. It's one thing to adapt a book to the screen, it's another thing entirely to adapt something that's already visual to another visual medium. I would argue while yes, The Last Airbender is an adaptation, it acts more like a remake. It's honestly on par with Disney's recent live-action remakes, just putting characters and their stories in real life. If Avatar had been like a book or even graphic novel, I could buy the fact that they would want to do a live-action adaptation. The cool thing about adapting books to movies and TV shows is we get to actually see these stories and characters brought to life, whether through animation or live action. The idea of bringing cartoons to real life, though, seems counterproductive. By putting these animated characters in real life, you're kinda just making them slower and awkward. The only upside is, I guess it's kinda cool to see bending in real life, but then you watch the movie and it's amazingly boring. I'm gonna make the bold claim that Avatar was never meant for live action. The fact that it's animated is part of its charm. If it truly was meant to be made to look realistic and use real actors to play the characters, then they would have made the show live action to begin with. I feel like whenever something animated is praised, there's almost always the question afterwards of, when is the real life version happening? As if to say the animated version isn't the definitive version, which is a pretty shit mentality to have if you ask me. Imagine asking the opposite every time a non-animated film came out. Where's the animated Lighthouse movie? Where's the animated Star Wars movie? Where's the animated Dark Crystal movie? Although, do puppets count as animation? I mean, Letterboxd labels Dark Crystal as animation, but is that true? Now, I'm not trying to separate animation storytelling from live-action storytelling as if one is better than the other. It's just in this situation, I believe that animation is the superior storytelling method for Avatar. I'm not trying to say every movie with real sets and actors would be improved with animation either. That's not how it works. I'm trying to point out the absurdity of even asking when the definitive version of something is happening, because that really devalues the original work. Some stories were meant for real sets and actors, while others were meant for the world of animation. Just because something is animated doesn't mean that down the line it's going to get a live-action version. I mean, could you imagine a live-action Simpsons movie? Or a live-action Family Guy movie? Hell, what about a live-action BoJack Horseman movie? You know, because that's all those shows are, waiting to inevitably get a live-action remake. These shows aren't iconic enough to just be animated. Eventually we probably will see these shows get live-action adaptations. I mean, if Avatar couldn't catch a break and still can't, it's only a matter of time, I guess. I think to really show how dumb of an idea this is, allow me to introduce you to another live-action adaptation of a pre-existing cartoon. Fan-O-Rama. Back in 2016, YouTube channel Cinema Relics created a fan film inspired by Futurama. Futurama is a Matt Groening cartoon with wacky-looking characters and an overall wacky setting, the future. It's one of my favorite TV shows, for many reasons, but if I had to pick one, I'd say it's because it's such a ridiculously creative world. There are so many different planets and settings in this show with all these crazy and memorable characters. However, if you take that world and try to replicate it into real life, it looks a lot lamer. Characters aren't as expressive or interesting, in fact, all the actors look uncomfortable. probably because they have a ton of makeup and prosthetics to make them look more like the cartoon, while also being more realistic. My main issue is that no matter how hard they tried, there was no way they were going to pull off a Futurama world in real life. Futurama was clearly not designed to be made into real life. It was made to be as wacky as possible. Now I know it's weird to compare a fan film on YouTube to a multi-million-dollar blockbuster, but like I said, no matter how hard these people tried, Futurama would just not work in real life. Fanorama at least has the YouTube charm to it, where you can say, hey, that's cool that they tried that. What's the Last Airbender's excuse?
What's your excuse?
This is why I'm pretty skeptical about the live-action series being done by Netflix. The problem isn't just that the movie was terrible, it's that it was broken from the start. Making a live-action version of something meant for the cartoon world is not going to work. But I guess it doesn't matter, because remember kids, animation is for babies and not real storytelling. Animated shows and movies aren't real emotional stories with likable characters that stick with you for a lifetime. Animation as a whole is just a starting point. It's only until they're made into lifeless, dark, CGI live-action movies are they mature and adult. The Last Airbender TV show is for little bitch babies and doesn't actually have anything of substance to say. There's no funny stuff, no heart, no emotion, just stupid baby characters made of colors and lines on paper. It's not real. This is. This lifeless corpse being puppeted around pretending to be a movie. This is the true adult version of that baby show. This is for adults. Yeah, I'll take the cartoon intended for children over penis hair any day. Have I gone off track again? I guess I have. Anyway, back to why it's disappointing. While looking up the movie and what people had to say about it, I came across the section on the Wikipedia page about the casting controversy, so I guess now is as good a time as ever to acknowledge the white elephant in the room. Katara and Sokka are played by white actors. That's it. That's the controversy. I mean, yeah, I guess it is kind of sketchy that these dark-skinned characters are played by white people, but I can't think of a single actor who was properly casted in this movie, so they don't really stick out in my mind as being notably worse. I mean, yes, I acknowledge that it's pretty fucked up to cast white actors in roles mostly fitted for people of color. And I also think that Paramount and Shyamalan's excuses are pretty weak.
The movie has 23 credited speaking roles, more than half of which feature Asian and Pan-Asian actors of Korean, Japanese and Indian descent.
Slow down there, buckaroo.
The filmmaker's interpretation reflects the myriad qualities that have made this series a global phenomenon. We believe fans of the original and new audiences alike will respond positively once they see it.
Ultimately, this movie, and then the three movies, will be the most culturally diverse tentpole movies ever released, period.
Sure.
But it's like I said, you could cast more actors of color in this movie and it would still be shit. My main issue isn't that they're white, it's more that they're not right to play these characters. Because they're shit. Alright, that's all I have to say on that. Moving on. All in all, I'd say the fact that this was trying to cram in so much into so little time was ultimately what made this movie disappointing. Put aside the lack of animation and white people, and there's just nothing to work with here. Like I said, this movie was broken from the beginning. All live-action remakes are. You can't squeeze an entire season of television into a less than 2-hour movie and expect to get the same reaction from people. Hell, it's not even that this was the first time people were seeing this particular story. There's already a perfectly good season of the original show that shows just how to do the story perfectly. When you try to replicate that and make it shitty, people are going to be disappointed. This movie fails as an adaptation in every sense of the word. So how does it fail at being a movie?
Don't worry. I've seen enough movies to know this is the part where the audience thinks it was all part of the show and loves it. Cue applause!
That was so terrible, I think you gave me cancer.
While writing the script, I asked other people would they consider this movie disappointingly bland, and well, a lot more people said no than I was thinking. Probably because more people would rather call it shit over anything else, and I agree. But I think Ben 11 put it nicely by saying that it certainly was bland, but more disappointingly incompetent. I mean, it certainly was incompetent at just about everything it attempted. I already went over its failures as an adaptation, but I want to separate it from the show for a bit just to prove how shitty this movie truly is. Because even though it's not a very good adaptation, that doesn't always mean the movie is necessarily bad. Take The Shining, for example. Earlier I said it was one of the adaptations that I would consider to be one of my favorite movies ever. However, it's apparently not a faithful adaptation of the original source material. So much so that Stephen King himself, the original author, downright hates Kubrick's version because it's not like the original book. I've never read the original King novel, and not to sound rude, but I kinda don't want to. But I understand his hatred for the Kubrick movie. It must suck seeing your original story get retooled to the point that you don't even recognize it as your own, and then for the people who retooled it get loads of praise. In any case, I still love the Kubrick movie and consider it to be a masterpiece of a horror film. Sometimes it doesn't matter if an adaptation is accurate. What matters is that it's been properly made suitable for a new purpose. Just look at the movie aptly named Adaptation. That's a movie about the literal adaptation of the book it's based on. But because the book was so aimless and worked better as, well, a book, screenwriter Charlie Kaufman took it upon himself to mold the story into something that could work as a movie. And honestly, it succeeded really well. It's a masterpiece of meta-commentary, and I would highly recommend it. So not all adaptations are necessarily bad. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have minded if The Last Airbender had nothing to do with the original source material. Hell, I probably would have respected it a lot more. However, the movie still has to be good in order for the changes to make sense. Because I'm not saying adaptations that stray far away from the source material are always good. Some are the absolute worst. The point I'm trying to make is that The Last Airbender is not a bad movie just because it fails as an adaptation. It's just not a very good movie to begin with. The acting is piss poor, skin color aside. These actors are not very good at portraying their characters very well, and it comes across as shitty characters anyway. Aang is not a playful 12-year-old, he's an awkward and nameless piece of cardboard. Katara is not the strong motherly friend, she's just girl who explains everything to the audience. Sokka is not the funny guy with a heart of gold, he's watered down Hayden Christensen.
I believe that my life force will leave my body and return to the moon spirit.
Liar!
Zuko isn't the tormented asshole that goes through one of the greatest character arcs ever, he's some angry teenager with pink eye. Iroh is not the ultimate badass who shows that not every firebender is an awful person, he's just some guy. Commander Zhao is not an actually threatening antagonist, he's Peter's boss from Spider-Man 2.
Go!
And Fire Lord Ozai is not some mysterious threat who you don't see for the majority of the series to build up his presence more and more. He's immediately shown to be some guy. Oh, and Appa and Momo are there because, I don't know, they were in the series. They serve absolutely no purpose in this movie. They have no character. You could cut them out entirely and nothing would change. Well, maybe not Appa, but you get it. But not only is the acting bad, it's honestly just the basic shit this movie gets wrong. Basic storytelling shit. Katara asks Aang what his name is when they get to the Southern Air Temple. This is 20 minutes after the movie has started, and after having already spent some time talking to each other back at their village. Now I know I said comparing the show to the movie doesn't matter, even though that's what I've been doing, but here I don't need to compare it to the show to prove my point. Even though I could because, well, the show does this better. But really think about how dumb these people are. They decided to help this strange boy they just met and flew all the way to the Southern Air Temple, all without knowing his name. Katara claims to hold responsibility for that little boy, but they barely just met him and didn't even know his name. You didn't think it was the responsible thing to ask him what his name was immediately? Even when taking the original show out of the equation, the character's motivations make even less sense. Same thing when Zuko dons the blue spirit mask to save Aang. The blue spirit isn't introduced until episode 13, a little over halfway through the season. Aang and Zuko had also run into each other before this on several occasions. They had begun to establish a weird relationship of sorts throughout the episodes leading up to the blue spirit episode. Here in the movie, Zuko and Aang have only met once, and not long enough to establish any form of a relationship. From a standalone movie perspective, this makes no sense. Again, yes, the blue spirit was an important episode in the first season, and for Zuko as a character. But it loses that importance when the context is watered down for timing's sake. Even Sokka and Yue's relationship is watered down to just having Katara explain it, and then when Yue has to make the sacrifice at the end, it comes to a shock to no one, but means nothing anyway. I just don't buy Sokka's pleas, mostly because the actor is really bad, but also because these characters haven't had time to bond and form a relationship. In terms of how this movie shows these events, them having a relationship makes no sense. There hasn't been time to show them together alone and bond. See, in the show, god damn it, I said I wasn't going to bring up the show in this segment. I actually felt emotional when Yue had to sacrifice herself to become the moon spirit. I bought that Sokka was really upset and that he had to let her go. Hell, I honestly might have teared up a bit too. It's a really emotional scene because these characters had time to connect and build something between them. This movie doesn't. Simple as that. I honest to God could just pick any scene out of the movie and compare it to the show, and the superior version would always be the original TV show. But as I've been trying to point out, I don't need the show to see how bad these scenes are because it really is just bad on its own. Nothing is established, everything is just a lamer version of the show without the heart and maturity. This is about as bad as a Hollywood version of the story can get. Everything acts like the original, but nothing feels like the original. And it's a damn shame. So yeah, The Last Airbender was about as bad as I was expecting. maybe even a little more so. It definitely meets the credentials to be considered disappointingly bland, but even then it's far worse than just that. It's incompetent in every sense of the word. It shows the worst case scenario for an adaptation going wrong. It's so bad that the recent Artemis Fowl adaptation has been labeled this decade's The Last Airbender, and as someone who's not familiar with that source material, I'm gonna still agree. The Last Airbender is without a doubt one of the worst movies to ever grace the silver screen. I'll say it. It's worse than Independence Day Resurgence. It's worse than BVS. I'll even go as far as to say it's a hell of a lot worse than Rise of Skywalker. I can't think of a single aspect I actually liked in this movie. No, not one thing. I could at the very least think of something I liked in those other movies, even if it's something small like an idea or an attempt at an idea. That's something. There is absolutely nothing of substance, nothing for me to latch onto and think that this was worth making. However, I guess that is one thing then, isn't it? Don't get me wrong, this movie sucks so much, it's baffling. But because of that baffling nature, I'm so fascinated by it. I am so fascinated by this movie and how bad it is. It's like a beautiful train wreck, minus the beautiful part. There is not one unironic aspect to this movie that impressed me. It's just the fact that it failed so spectacularly at adapting one of the most beloved set of characters and stories ever. I almost feel bad for Shyamalan. This doesn't seem like his usual brand of bad, though to be fair, I haven't seen any of them. But still, from what I've seen with people discussing The Happening and Lady in the Water, they never get to be this bad. This is a whole other level of bad. It's insulting, it's infuriating, and the more I find wrong with it, the more fascinated I become. How could this go through so many people and still come out this badly? I don't even know how to feel with the sequel tease at the end. Do I laugh at the absurdity of a sequel to this movie? Do I get angry at the movie for even having the very thought that it would be good enough for a sequel? Do I cringe at the actress who's supposed to be Azula struggle to convince me she's Azula and fail miserably? Seriously, this actress is so bad at acting like Azula, even within a couple of seconds. I was convinced she wouldn't be good for the role. Hell, I could just see the absolute train wreck of the second movie with her as the main villain, if it had ever happened. That's how bad of a couple of seconds it was.
I do,
Again, this movie just keeps on impressing me with its badness. I keep reinforcing how fascinated by its awfulness that it may seem like I didn't get anything from the series. But that's kind of the interesting place I find myself in. I have extreme reactions for both the original Avatar series and movie. I have nothing but shit to throw at this monstrosity of a movie, and I have absolutely no problems calling it one of the absolute worst adaptations ever. But I do have an insane amount of respect for the television series. I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the greatest TV shows of all time. It impressed me to no end and left me stunned. I laughed at almost every joke. I felt for Aang and the others as they continued on their journey. I legit, no joke, cried when Zuko reunited with Iroh, because that's a relationship I didn't want to see broken up. Even just thinking about it leaves me devastated, but I'm glad that it did. I'm willing to bet that Avatar will remain in my mind for years to come, and that I'll have so much fun revisiting it. As for the movie, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I would absolutely rewatch it too, because it was such an absolute shit show that I need to see it again. See how it fails so effortlessly that it honestly becomes a work of art in my mind. I'm truly devastated, and yet impressed. Honestly, this is what I kinda wanted from Rise of Skywalker. A movie so bad, so broken, so infuriating that I can't help but be in awe. I've already forgotten Rise of Skywalker, but I will never forget The Last Airbender for as long as I live. Oh, and before anyone asks, no, I will not be watching The Legend of Korra. It doesn't seem as good as Avatar, nor does it seem as amazingly bad as The Last Airbender. Plus, I've binged through ER's numerous videos on it multiple times, so I pretty much just get the gist of it. Yell at me all you want in the comments, you ain't gonna convince me.